Hi, everyone. It's Joanne Moffat, and today I'm here to talk about trauma. We're talking about 12 big ideas on addressing trauma in the classroom and in school. So, this is part of our how we can be trauma informed in our work. So, first, let's think about trauma. Remember, trauma is extremely prevalent in our society and in our community. When we look at kids with trauma, we're looking at kids who've been exposed to adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. And remember, some examples of ACEs are parental divorce, witnessing domestic violence, being exposed and enduring physical, sexual abuse, experiencing the death of a loved one, parental incarceration, and homelessness. And so, as we go through this today, we're going to look at 12 ways that we can be mindful of how we can work with our trauma kids. So, being mindful, the first thing that we really need to be aware of is acknowledging yourself and being aware of you. I'd like you to think about why you chose this work. What was your why? Why did you show up to do this work? Well, it's because of who you are, your interest, your passion and compassion. So self-awareness is that. It's being available. It's showing up. It's having that nurturing heart. It's expressing yourself and your passion and compassion with your encouraging words. Self-awareness is also that accountability that you need to have for the kids that you work with every day, that accountability to have them achieve as much, to grow their brains, and to keep your expectations of them high. Yes, they've endured a lot, but they are capable of a lot. The next big idea that I want you to be thinking about is in being aware of yourself first. It's then recognizing your triggers. We are constantly bombarded throughout our day with events that are experienced by kids, and we get caught up in those experiences. That experience creates sometimes a storm for us. And sometimes in getting caught up in the storm, we aren't acknowledging that we don't have to get caught up in that storm. So the first step is to really recognize what is your trigger. Kids are responding to triggers all the time, but what sets you off? Remember, for everyone, triggers are normal. And sometimes what sets you off one day is because of what's happening for you that day. So, for example, checking in with yourself. Are your values being challenged in some way? Maybe something's happened in your own life and something is triggering you because of a value you have. An example, a relative may have had a bad experience with drug use, and that's left you scarred. And you then are dealing with a student who perhaps has, or a parent who's had drug involvement or exposure. Is that a trigger for you? Think about that. Checking in with yourself is also checking in with your sense of your own personal safety. Are you feeling afraid? Is there something in the situation, in the environment, that's triggering a fear response in you? The next one we're going to talk about a little bit more as we move on through this, but remember we have an upstairs and a downstairs brain, and the downstairs brain is really where our limbic system is, our feelings, and also it's where our amygdala takes care of us with that fight, flight, freeze response. And that is only kicked in when we're feeling that sense of feeling danger. It's a danger or an unsafe response that is taking place. So if that's happening for you, if you can hear your voice getting louder, then you're being triggered. Something is rocking your boat. Your downstairs brain is flipping. You are becoming engaged in some kind of I'm not safe response. The other thing that might happen in recognizing your triggers is that you may be getting those ants, which are the automatic negative thoughts. And often we'll get the automatic negative thoughts or automatic negative thinking when we're not in our optimal performance range. So the optimal performance range is what we need to do our work. It means that we're coming to work rested and ready to go, and not having a lot of our own personal stuff getting in the way. If you're not in your optimal performance range, you often do get into those cognitive distortions or those ants where some of them having that always or never thinking, focusing on the negative, fortune telling, like you have this vision and this is how it's going to be. It's like you just know it's going to turn out this way, and it's a fatalistic kind of thought. Sometimes it is personalizing and thinking that behavior is happening to you. And then, we also get into that guilt beatings that we do to ourselves, where we say, we should have done this, we should have done that, and we're just not good enough. So recognizing that you may be doing that is really important, because you have to neutralize those thoughts. In recognizing your triggers, you can also use that new lens of how you're looking at things. Instead of saying, there he goes again, or there she goes again, you can try, what does this student need? So it's reframing, relooking, having a new way to see it. Having a response plan ready is really important, especially when we're not in our OPR. So even having a little sticky note that says, and you keep it on your clipboard, it's not about me. That's really neutralizing the ant, right? The automatic negative thinking. And then also being able to say, if student A does this, I am going to say this, or even just have the comment that you're going to say. For example, if a student is argumentative, you can say that, you have a right to think the way you want to think. It's okay. We have a different opinion. Remember your prevention and PBIS strategies. You've got them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on through this. But your prevention strategies that you do have to do with your self-care, have to do with what your setup is for your students, and have to do with what you know in acknowledging kids, and that 5-to-1, 5 acknowledgements to 1 redirection. The third thing I'd like to talk about with these big ideas of how we can be trauma sensitive in our classrooms and schools is really staying focused in your role. Well, you know what your job is. Some of you who are watching this are paraprofessionals working in classrooms with kids or on playgrounds or one-to-one or small groups. Some of you are custodial staff. Some of you are food service. Some of you may even be grounds. And of course, many of you may be bus drivers. The important thing is thinking about, you know, your job. You're one person, part of a team. And if a student is beginning to trigger you, you know that you can stay focused in your role. You can be saying, you know, I'm going to give him choices, but there's still my choices. I'm going to provide some redirection, but I'm still doing the redirection. It's your role. You're in control of you. When you stay in your upstairs brain, that is where you're able to think, reason, be flexible. Remember, it's when we get stuck and we freeze that we're in that downstairs brain. That's when we start to do the power struggle. And remember, you know, we're going to talk about power struggles don't get us anywhere. So think about the strategies that you're using, whether it is, you know, to provide an alternative activity or refocus the student's attention with that redirection. You're the one that's staying neutral. You're being calm. You're taking your breath. They can be emotional. As they get louder, you're going to get quieter. You're going to stay in that upstairs brain because you know your role. When we say that we're going to stay out of our downstairs brain, again, we're building on the 12 big ideas here. We're going to be self-aware. You're going to really be focusing on that neutral space, that you're not going to be reacting emotionally. You're not going to get caught up in the storm. Your downstairs brain does get that caught up feeling, and that's that, like we said before, that survival mode where your arousal and emotional part of you will get triggered. So if you feel yourself freezing up, if you hear yourself doing the arguing back and forth, or even raising your voice, or you just want to avoid the situation altogether and go away from the problem kid, then that's where you really have to start that self-talk. It's not about me. You need to do the neutralize those ands, and you want to get into that self-talk where I can handle this and get back in that upstairs brain. I am a paraprofessional. I am a bus driver. I am a food service worker. I know my role. This one is really important. Connections. That is really what it's all about, right? That's why we're here. That's why we do this work. The 12 big ideas. This should probably be like huge, in huge font right now. When we think of our connections that we have outside of work, we know how important they are. I have referenced Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and everyone has the need to be loved. Everyone has the need to be cared for and acknowledged. And all that happens through connections. So when you think about the students that you're working with, connections, relationships, That is the crux of our work, especially with our trauma impacted kids. I want you to ask yourself these questions about the kids that you work with. What's their name? Using kids' names, oh, that's so validating. Now, if you're a food service worker, bus driver, if you're seeing kids on playgrounds as a paraprofessional, it's hard to know everybody's name. Just work on some of them a little at a time. It really is very powerful for kids to hear adults use their names. Get to know them. Get to know some of these kids. If they're wearing a Seahawks jersey, well, that's easy to talk to them about sports or football, or if they're wearing a UW shirt, you know that, you can go there in conversation. Sometimes, though, it takes asking some questions like, about who they hang out with outside of school, and if they've seen a movie, or if you see them reading a book, what that book is about. Maybe they like science fiction. Now, you don't have to become an expert on all these topics. Just asking a couple of questions, that really helps open up the door to understanding a little bit more about our kids. If you're a paraprofessional working in the classroom or with a small group of kids or on a one-on-one situation, you're going to be really getting good information about how a student learns. And some of our kids don't learn best by sitting down and looking at a board. Some of them learn best when they're moving. But you're the detective, and you're going to figure that out. In connecting with our kids, you're going to find out when and how they've been successful. Maybe it was during, an art class or in music. Maybe it was with math, or maybe they were super kind to a friend during the day, and you notice that at lunch. Those are small successes, and that will help you understand that child and even bring that back to the kid when they need that. In your connections, I want you to ask how often you're interacting with students versus just standing or monitoring. Now, in your roles, knowing your roles, that's part of this too, right? You don't always have the opportunity to interact. But remember, interacting isn't just the verbal interacting. It's the nonverbal. It's the smiles. It's the nods. It's the thumbs ups. It's giving kids acknowledgement. So you don't always have to be verbally interacting. We're talking about just interacting. We're all part of this community of stakeholders wrapped around our kids. And finally, when you are looking at our students, we want to be asking what interventions have worked, and we want to build on those interventions. So you may not know, but how will you find out? Connecting sometimes means not just connecting with the student, but connecting with the other people who are involved with the student. So another big idea has to do with thinking about our influence that we have versus the labels that we give. Influence that we have versus labels that we apply and give. When you think about labels, often we hear people refer to students by what the characteristic that is negative It's typically it's a negative label. We often don't hear people using a label that is a positive, but it sounds more of a, oh, it's terrible. So a label um, can dismiss the child and can dismiss our work with the child. It's almost like it's a reason why it's not a possible situation to help or to partner or to mentor and encourage a student. We need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond that label. So rather than saying this, this lack of focus makes it impossible for me to work with this kid, or this unwillingness to try makes it impossible for me to work with this kid. You want to be reminding yourself that your influence, how you can teach differently, how you talk to him or her, how you provide room for him or her, how you identify his or her strengths, really impacts how that student will see him or herself. And, instead of saying, I can't control this, you can say, I can influence this. I can influence this hard time this kid has with believing in himself. I can influence this inability she feels in doing math. I can influence that by how I approach this today. So think about, in your classrooms and in your small groups and in your different settings, how you are influenced, how you do something with a student versus how you label them will be empowering. Oh, here's another one. So I really like this one. This one is opening the window. So you've heard the old saying, right? When one door closes, another one opens. Well, instead of saying that, we're going to say, when we feel that the door is closed, we're going to open a window. So what does that mean? So basically, you're going to remember you're going to remember your goals, your mission. Remember, we started today by saying, what brought you to this work? That self-awareness. What brought you here? Why do you do what you do? Well, now we're not going to look at the why. We're going to look at the how. We're going to look at how we do it. So if a door is closing with a kid and you're feeling like you're not getting anywhere, and we've all been there. We have all been there. We have to remember that we're going to need to get ourselves in a different place. We have to get unstuck. If we're getting into our downstairs brain, we need to breathe. That's on us. That's not on the student. We need to breathe. So you're going to breathe. And if it's a student you're working with, you can say, I'm breathing. I'm going to get some oxygen into my brain. You can say that. That's okay. It's modeling, right? Opening a window when you're feeling that the doors are all closing, when you're working with a student with this challenging behavior, you can reach out to colleagues. I have a number of 3 that you can reach out to. I say 3 because it's good to get different opinions, different ideas, and I would challenge you to go to 3 different kinds of colleagues. Perhaps another a teacher, perhaps another person who's doing similar work as you, maybe an administrator, maybe a counselor, but go to 3 different colleagues. Even, it would be cool to go to different people who have eyes on the student at different times of the day as well. Partnering then with a counselor or administrator, that really helps. It helps you begin to feel like you can come up with a plan together, that you're not in this alone. When you open a window, you're also opening the floodgates to teamwork. And that's really what this is all about. We really need teamwork in creating trauma sensitive classrooms and schools. And that's what stakeholders are. We're all in this together, checking out your feelings and your perceptions with other stakeholders is really key. And the other piece is seeking more knowledge. If you have a student who is refusing to write, for example, and I remember this 4th grader that I worked with who was so bright, and he could do math in his head like nobody's business, but he was unable to put it down on paper. So, that was really a thing. Not being able to write was really a thing. Dysgraphia, it's really there. So getting more knowledge about that and then sharing that with him, empowering him to find another way to get his work from his head to the paper. It was very empowering for him, but also for me, because I was able to share what I learned with him. And we all can do that. You don't need to be in any special role. You can all seek more knowledge. Now, when we think about these big ideas that we're looking at for getting our kids where we want them to be while we're having trauma-sensitive practices, we want to make sure that we don't get lost in the behavior. Sometimes we're so focused on our goals of where we need to go, what we need to be achieving, where our kids need to be, that we forget what disruption really is. When we think about disruption, and I've said this before, disruption is abnormal behavior. Abnormal behavior is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation or trigger. So, disruption disrupts. It takes us off our paths of where we're going and what we want to get done. But our job is to remember we can't get lost. We can't veer off and get lost just in that behavior. We have to reflect on, oops, this is a normal reaction to an abnormal trigger, an abnormal behavior. This student is being triggered by something. And, this is normal. It is temporary. Often, when we have a crisis, we think it's going to last and last and last. It's temporary, guys. It's not going to last a long time. There is a beginning and an end. It feels like it's going to last a long time because our own panic will begin to set in. Remember, breathe, stay in that upstairs brain. Your job is to teach that it's frustration is normal. Frustration to these extraordinary life events is normal. And then teaching them that you're going to provide that safe place through your empathy and understanding, you're going to provide a safe place where they can express their frustration. And you may not know where that safe place is on your own. You may have, that's that part of that planning that we talked about earlier. That sometimes you're going to have to, go back to when we all get caught up in the storm. One of the big things is making sure that we're going to have a prevention plan. So you know where your safe place is going to be. Maybe there's a take a break. In elementary schools, most of us have take a breaks or calm zones in our classroom. In the middle school, it may be the safe place, maybe a counselor's office. It may be in a mentor-teacher space. It may be walking around a track. In high school, same thing. Could be going over to the counseling center. But figuring that out is part of what we do when we don't get lost in the behavior. And remember, it's temporary. We have to acknowledge that frustration is real, trauma is real, triggers are real, and we're teaching those coping skills they need so they can get through this frustration and back to being engaged. And that's the other piece here. So you're going to be teaching that it's okay to not be okay. But we still have stuff to do. You're going to empower the kids by acknowledging that what they're going through, it's hard and it's not fair. You're going to be able to empathize with them. You're going to walk in their shoes with them. You can't feel all that they feel, but you can validate it and acknowledge that this is hard stuff. And it's just, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to go through this. It stinks. Really is hard. And then you're going to be able to partner with them, brainstorm with them, and figure out a plan with them of how they can work it out. But you still have to have an expectation that they're going to come back and be engaged and do what they need to do. You still have to have, like we said earlier, those expectations. You show up every day with your caring heart, and you continue to acknowledge that they are capable by having expectations. So this one is something that, again, has to do with recognizing ourselves as part of the process in the same space with kids who are experiencing their trauma. In order to be a trauma-sensitive classroom, trauma-sensitive school, we need to really acknowledge and keep fear where it needs to be, and acknowledge that fear reactions that we may have, that's normal. It's really normal. But when we have fear reactions, especially to those kids who are in those top tier, the tier 3 behaviors that can be pretty extreme when they're being unsafe, our fear reactions can be extreme. So it's important for you to do this next piece, which is checking for understanding, looking at their needs, looking at, what we talked about earlier, their connectedness, using your relationship, looking at their feelings of not being in control of things around them. Working on that is so key, that control piece. And, obviously, when you're checking for understanding, you want to make sure that the physical aspect is also being dealt with. That, some of our kids, the littles, especially elementary kids, the primary kids, sometimes the intermediate ones, if they haven't eaten, they may be really off balance. So even checking for understanding around those physical needs as well. Even our older kids, if the kids are coming to school and they're distracted and disengaged, that might trigger in us, oh, here we go again. But if you check for understanding and then look at, oh, well, when I talk with him, I find out that he doesn't eat breakfast at home, and then you set him up on a plan to have breakfast at school. That's that plan. That's moving into that next piece. You can have your own feeling, which is normal, but then move out of that survival emotion that we have into your upper brain of understanding and your forward thinking of making a plan. You can provide a break. You can do check and connect. You can have a student job, a healthy snack. And many of you who are doing this PowerPoint today are looking at this and saying, well, this is my job. How do I do that? Well, if you're a custodian, many of you have worked with kids in providing jobs for kids to do, wiping tables. Those are empowering for kids. Those are for the kids that are in that higher need group, those tier 2 and tier 3 kids who may be oppositional, attention seeking. It's giving them an attention in a positive way. Bus drivers, check and connect. You do that all the time. You check in with kids when they get on the bus. You connect with them. You talk about their weekends. You're the very first person that they see after a weekend. Very important. When we think about our food service staff, I can't tell you how many food service people make a difference for kids. They're so flexible. If kids need food, they're there. They are there, not just with food, but with a smile. And you, paraprofessionals, you do all of those things, giving them jobs, setting up the situations that they need, providing a break. I just want to say, as part of the plan for our kids, we're all in this together, and we're all doing this in tandem with each other. And that's just part of being a team of trauma-informed practitioners, professionals working together. So when we look at this next one, our grace versus blame. So our goal with this, when we have the behaviors that accompany our kids that have high ACE scores, when we have kids that are aggressive or they are disengaged or hyperactive or appearing to be disrespectful, oppositional, getting into power struggles, avoiding and running from you, not listening. Our goal is to shift the behavior. That's our goal. We have to redirect the behavior. We have to remember that because I said so doesn't work. That just opens up a power struggle. And does anyone win? We talked about this before. No one wins in a power struggle. And when we think about what does it mean to have grace statements versus blame statements, so think about this. I am going to count to 5, and then we're going to find a way to work together to fix this problem. That's a grace statement. You have until the count of 5 to sit down in that chair, get your pencil out, and get going, or you're going to be out of this class. Which one do you think is going to give the kids some room to make a choice? The second one really will probably open up a power struggle. Nobody's going to win. Can go back and forth. Emotions can get high. If you are giving the counting to 5, you're giving the kid time to make a decision. You're giving the kid space to avoid some embarrassment, perhaps. And you're helping that child, that student, make a choice. So they're feeling some control. Now, another grace statement. You run a small group, for example, and you are doing a small lesson, group lesson, with some kids who are needing help with reading or math. And a student comes running into your group, loud screaming right after recess. And you have already gone over rules, so they know what the rules are. So grace would be saying, "Oh, Johnny," using his name, "can you please come back to the group, start over," showing me and all of us that expected way that you're supposed to come in. I know you can do it. Versus, "You're not welcome coming into this group the way you're coming in now. Go back to your class." So we want to have grace versus blame. We're still having expectations. We're not, as some people think, giving in. We're working with. We're working alongside. And now we want to look at acts of kindness. A trauma-informed school with trauma-informed professionals. When we're addressing trauma in classrooms and in schools, when we're creating those trauma-sensitive spaces, we're going to have acts of kindness. For yourself, you need to acknowledge what's going right. You want to pause. You want to have the attitude of the glass is half full versus the glass is half empty. And I know it's hard to do that. It's easy for me to say, but I've been in there, and I've been in those situations where it's hard to see the positives. You may have a student who hasn't been able to sit in a seat. You may have the same student, as he's wandering around the room, has maybe thrown a couple things on the floor. But then you have that same student who's been, who caught you smiling at him, and he smiled back at you. That's what's going right. You connected with him. And you have that same student who was able to sit for 7 minutes of a 20-minute lesson. That's glass half full. Acknowledging those things is really important. even seeing and saying what you see, seeing it, saying it. Sometimes a kid can't hear it yet, so at least say it to yourself. And acts of kindness, you do the self-acknowledging, but then acknowledge, as I said to the students, your nonverbal, the smiles, the thumbs up, the fist bumps. Maybe you have a secret handshake or a secret something that you do with them. Could even be a little pinky to pinky. And doing also the verbal of saying what you see, acknowledging those things, and remembering that 5 acknowledgments to 1 redirection is really important. And when we do that acknowledging effort, right? That's having that growth mindset, acknowledging that it's hard and you don't know it yet, but you're getting there. Acknowledging when kids have been flexible, when they've given themselves permission to try something, they've been flexible, when they're flexible thinkers. Just those are some examples of how you can be doing that kindness with kids. And so it's not just practicing grace and shifting from blame to having grace, but it's also acts of kindness. And in order to do all this, in order to have these trauma-sensitive schools, trauma-sensitive classrooms, in order to do that, you need to take care of yourself. And we've done this talk a lot. You need to maintain your health. You need to exercise. Many people say 3 times a week minimum. I'm not saying that. I'm saying do what works for your routine, but have a routine. Eat well. Rest. Don't skip lunch, by the way. Have healthy practices for taking care of your health at school. It's very important. Self-care is also love. It's loving yourself, and it's doing something for you once a week at a minimum, whatever that is. It could be that hobby that we talked about when we did the self-care presentation. It could be getting together with friends, going out on a date with your partner, giving yourself permission to watch a goofy movie. Whatever it is, do something for yourself. Self-care is also, like we talked about in another presentation that I had done on self-care, is building up your sense of competence. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What can you learn? How can you grow? You need to do something to make yourself feel like you're still growing and it feels good. And then every day, I challenge you to write down something for which you're grateful. Having a gratitude every day. Have a jar. Put the gratitudes in a jar. And then when you need reminders, you can pull them out. Something you were thankful for. Just like you may have a put-up jar in your classroom where kids can put up compliments for kids. Well, compliment yourself. Have your own little put-up jar where you're putting in compliments or gratitudes every day. It's okay to include yourself in what you're thankful for, that you're thankful for the ability to do the work that you do. Okay. So the simple truths about these 12 big ideas simple truth is that it's really about you. These 12 big ideas for having a trauma sensitive classroom, trauma sensitive school is that you come to work every day. You're courageous to do this work. You are courageous. Because of the way you connect, you transform lives. Isn't that amazing? You transform lives. And you help our kids write new endings to their stories. So, paying it forward, you do that for them, and they're going to do it for others. That, like the waves that go in and out, they're going to take what you have given them and they're going to go out and give it to others. It's just how it works. Thank you for a child is a person who's going to carry on what you have started. The fate of humanity is in his hands. That's a quote by Abraham Lincoln. Old, but still true to this day. So you've shown up to work. You've paid attention. You've done these 12 big ideas. You've made great connections. You've had grace. You've been courageous. You've paid attention to all of these children. You knew their names. They may come back to you when they're a police officer or a chef or a doctor, and they may say thank you, and you may not remember them, but they'll remember you. You're creating our future. Trauma-informed practice, trauma-sensitive schools work because of you. Thank you.